Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today is day 56 of the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. And the fighting obviously continues. We continue to see very heavy fighting in the eastern portions of the country, running along that, what I would define now as the Kramatorsk, Severodonetsk front. This area is vitally important for the ongoing Russian war effort, as it is for the ongoing Ukrainian war effort. And I'm going to try to kind of get into what is the biggest challenge right now for the Russian military in achieving some of its objectives in this area of operation, especially along this kind of this southeasterly direction of the ongoing operation, which is really the reality right now. It is the only major area in which the Russians are attempting to progress the offensives. Obviously, there are some limited activities taking place in the area of Kherson and towards Zaporizhia, but not the same types of efforts that we're seeing in the east. But I think, again, going back into this conflict, no one would have foreseen that the Ukrainians would have held out for this long. At least if you look at what was coming out of some of the mainstream media, that Kiev would fall in a matter of days. In some cases, some of the predictions were 3 days, and it would be over with. And obviously, that is far from the case. I would have to say, I would have to wonder, and I'm probably going to get some pushback on this, but it is what it is. But imagine if the French had fought the way the Ukrainians are fighting during World War II, and did not initially capitulate Paris as they did during that conflict. How would that war have evolved and looked if that was the case? But again, you got to give the Ukrainians credit for their tenacity and kind of building this, at least on the surface, appears to be this national cohesion to fight the Russian military. Now, with that being said, the Ukrainians are getting the modern equivalent of what would be Lend-Lease, and really beyond Lend-Lease, because a lot of this equipment is not being paid for by the Ukrainians. It is simply an infusion, a direct infusion of military aid by the United States. It's now being reported that the Western allies have now started to infuse the Ukrainian military with aircraft, and it is unknown what those aircraft are. Probably either MiG-29s or upgraded Romanian MiG-21s. Difficult to say, but apparently that is happening. The United States is also looking at another $800 to another $1 billion in direct aid to the Ukrainian military. And by some reports indicate that almost 30 to 40% of the entire Javelin production line has been sent to the Ukrainian military. Maybe I misspoke in terms of saying production line. The actual physical production of the Javelin, the amounts that have been produced, about 30 to 40% reportedly have been sent to the Ukrainian military, and that is causing some concern inside the United States military in terms of if another conflict were to erupt, say against China or some other adversary, North Korea, for instance, would the United States have the ability to ramp up production of the Javelin to meet what is happening in Ukraine and possibly where this other war could take place at some point. But it's not just the United States. The next batch will be another $800 to $1 billion in aid. Obviously, much of that is in the way of munitions and ammunition, but also we're seeing that from Poland and a host of the United Kingdom and a host of other countries as well. And that aid continues. And the likelihood of the sort of success that we're currently seeing by the Ukrainians because of this U.S. aid probably would not be occurring if, in fact, this aid has not been delivered as it has been. But right now, we continue to see this Russian military operation in the east of the country. And the real big issue right now for the Russians is its inability to maneuver its company and battalion-sized elements against Ukrainian forces in defensive strong points that possess these advanced anti-tank guided weapon systems. So it takes very, very few Ukrainian defenders. You could have a platoon company-sized element in many cases equipped and heavily equipped with in-laws, javelins, Panzerfaust 3s, Ukraine's own indigenous Stunka that are preventing some of these battalion tactical groups, battalion-sized elements of the Russian military from maneuvering. The initial lead vehicles of the Russian military get hit by javelins, in-laws, Stunkas, what have you, even RPG-7s in some cases. And I'll kind of talk about how the RPG-7, the AT-4, is even finding its own in this conflict, which has much less range and not quite as accurate. But the lead vehicles and these battalion tactical groups get hit. It's very, very difficult right now for the Russians to go off-road and to maneuver. And when that does happen, the Ukrainians have been setting up additional layers of defenses that kind of negate some of those Russian operations. But if we go and we look over here towards Severodonetsk, which is on the east bank of this river, the Severodonetsk River, what you have in this area is basically a 20-plus mile kind of a river valley. It's really kind of flat terrain, but within this area, especially on the eastern bank, or the northern bank, the east and northern bank, if you can see where my cursor is going, these areas are heavily, heavily forested, with many lakes and streams and tributaries of this river that exists. And as I talked about in my previous video, this is very advantageous terrain for small groups of Ukrainian anti-tank weapons teams to operate and cause a lot of problems for the Russian military. So you have this area near Severodonetsk, and by the way, it's being reported that Severodonetsk has been all but destroyed. We hear that up to 70%, maybe even more now, of the city has been rubbleized in certain cases. And it's become, for all intents and purposes, a fortress city of the Ukrainians, kind of on that eastern bank of the Severodonetsk River. And surrounding Severodonetsk is, again, these deep and very heavy forested areas in which these small Ukrainian, we see sniper teams, small element infantry activity taking place, that possess these anti-tank weapon systems interdispersed with urban areas. And this is what is making it very, very difficult for the Russians to maneuver and be successful, especially in these areas where it's, again, very heavily forested with dense areas of urbanization as well. And we're seeing the Russians employ large amounts of artillery in an attempt to reduce and destroy Ukrainian forces in these areas. But at the same time, it's very, very difficult for the Russians to do that without destroying major urban areas or large areas of terrain. Very, very difficult and challenging military objective given the nature of modern warfare in terms of the use of drones and in conjunction with both these new anti-tank systems and long-range artillery. And in conjunction to the use of these anti-tank weapons teams, the Ukrainians still are continuing to deploy drones that have the ability to spot Russian formations, and the Ukrainians still possess a very heavy amounts of artillery and long-range multiple launch rocket systems that the Ukrainians are using also to attack these Russian lead elements. And again, it's not just the ability of the Ukrainians to deploy these drones. It's also the real-time intelligence that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in the United States is providing the Ukrainians. So the United States has the ability to detect a Russian battalion tactical group in a certain area that may be operating, let's say, near Severodonetsk. Then that information is immediately transferred to the Ukrainians, and those coordinates are then provided where long-range fires of the Ukrainian military can then provide direct fires missions on those Russian elements that are trying to maneuver. And that is what's causing the Russians such difficulty, especially in the environments near Severodonetsk, in these areas where we see these large dense forests with river terrain feature obstacles and urban areas. Very, very difficult military situation to operate in. And it's not that the Russian military is completely incompetent. I think there are elements in which we have seen the Russian military being incompetent, but the Russians are fighting a very, very challenging opposing force in the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are not pushovers, and I think if we were to see another conflict take place possibly where we see the Russians engage another adversary, it may look completely different than what this does now. And just wanted to talk about that a little bit. Where the Russians are really looking to break out and succeed are areas south of Izium, and especially kind of to the west of Horlivka and Donetsk. And if the Russians can, in fact, reduce some of these defensive positions of the Ukrainian military and then start to maneuver as it dries out a bit, as the Russians finally are able to actually operate over land as opposed to operating over roadway. Again, a lot of these fields, from the intel that I have, still are very difficult for Russian military vehicles, even tanks, are getting stuck in some of these fields with a lot of mud. And in some cases, we've seen the Ukrainians intentionally flooding many of these routes that the Russians would take into the country. And we saw that quite a bit happen north of Kiev, which is even more marshier than the areas in the east that we're seeing right now. But there has not been a large amount of progress in this new offensive by the Russians. I don't believe the Russians have started to fully maneuver as of yet. I think they're still prepping the battlefield, and that makes complete sense. Me personally, if I was the warfighter in command of this operation, I would probably continue tactical air efforts. I would continue the use of long-range fires and artillery against Ukrainian frontline positions until things dry out a bit, and probably until we get into the late part of May, early part of June, where it becomes much warmer, things dry out, and I could then maneuver my battalion tactical groups in a proper way, as opposed to operating along these very narrow highways of advance, where the Ukrainians are taking advantage of that and employing these anti-tank guided weapon systems. It still does not negate the fact that the United States is providing this real-time situational awareness to the Ukrainians. That's a completely another issue on its own. And obviously the providing of the arms and armaments that are needed for the Ukrainians to continue the war. The Ukrainians would find it very, very difficult going forward without all this equipment coming into the country. And I think at a certain point, we may have to look at the Russians escalating the conflict to try and stop the inflow of these arms that are coming into Ukraine. If in fact the Russians eventually want to be successful in this conflict, they're going to have to start doing that in some way. And unfortunately, the Russians are going to have to start looking at the North Atlantic Treaty Organization as an aggressive entity directly fighting the Russians themselves. And if that happens, obviously we would be looking at a escalation of the war. But the simple fact is that a lot of the success that the Ukrainians are having right now is because of the contribution by NATO and the United States and other nations as well that continue to support the Ukrainians. But that's kind of where we stand for today. We're continuing to watch the East very, very closely. Our understanding, it is still very much a rough going for the Russians. But at the same time, I have to note that given the use and the amounts of heavy artillery and tactical air efforts, you also have to ask the question is how long can the Ukrainians continue to sustain the kind of casualties that they are without a doubt sustaining by this ongoing Russian military operation. These Russian daily sorties into Ukraine, these constant cruise missile strikes, these long-range fires are going to continue to take a toll on the Ukrainians. And then the question is at a certain point, do we start to see a generalized collapse of the Ukrainian ability to conduct war because of the types and extensive casualties that, without a doubt, have to be occurring in this conflict? But we don't know the answer to that, and ultimately the future will decide the outcome of this conflict, obviously. But that's where we stand for today. We continue to watch the situation very, very closely. Just one more point I wanted to talk about real quick is Mariupol. The last remaining probably several hundred Ukrainian forces are operating in the this massive metallurgical plant that's the size of a small city, really, with vast underground bunkers and tunnels and what have you, that is helping them defend this area. Now, we do understand the Russians have started to utilize bunker busting munitions in the 2-ton range of ordnance, and we're also seeing Russian strategic bombers starting to drop heavy ordnance on this area as well. So I would say that if those are the types of munitions that the Russians are now using, the probability that this will last much longer is probably is in doubt at this point. But another issue that concerns me as well are the reports of the of Ukrainian citizens that are now inside of some of these complexes, this metallurgical facility that had really been inhabited by Ukrainian nationalist formations, Azov battalions, and territorial defense force. So I guess the question is why and how did this large body of non-combatants get into this metallurgical plant? I mean, obviously it's a frontline area even prior to kind of the situation as it stands now. It's on the eastern side of the river that kind of cuts Mariupol in half. And I guess the question is how do they get there, and why are they there? Just you have to ask that question. And is it something that they did with intent, seeking shelter maybe in these vast bomb shelters that exist, or are they there possibly because of more nefarious reasons by some of these nationalist units that are operating in this area? And again, we don't really know. I think it's reasonable that there were bomb shelters on the western portions of the city that could have been utilized, and obviously for some reason we now see these alleged non-combatants that are now hunkering down in these areas that may could cause the Russians to pause in terms of using some of these large ordnance, these large bunker-busting bombs to drive out these Ukrainian defenders. I do also know that in all probability the Russians would have liked to seize this metallurgical plant in whole and not to have damaged it to such an extent that it's basically it's no longer useful. And unfortunately for the Russians, that appears to be what is now happening. But that is the news for today, and we will continue obviously to monitor and report and have more information very, very soon. Have a good day, everybody. Thanks for joining us.